Mm.
All right, welcome to Hot Off the Press, the show with new releases, the people that bring them to us. Before we start, let's go around the panel and have everyone introduce themselves. We'll start with you, Patrick.
Hey, I'm Patrick Dugan. I am the author of the Darkest Storm series. My latest book is Storm Shattered. It is out as of the 28th, and it's blurbed by Sean and McGuire, so pretty excited about that.
Great. Les?
Yeah, my name's Les Gould. I write science fiction, fantasy, and some urban fantasy now. My latest release is The Lost Peterson Apostle. Came out in May 21st, so it's out there and available. It's one of the newer Monster Hunters in John Hartnett's Bubbaverse.
Great. And Chris?
Chris A. Jackson. I write all kinds of fantasy, science fiction, and have just broken into a trilogy with Falstaff, the only contemporary series that I've written. It's urban fantasy, Dragons of Boston series, and book number 1, Dragon Dreams, came out last year, and book number 2 is so hot it's going to be out in like less than a week, hopefully. I have not seen the cover yet, but it's Dragon's Nemesis, and it will be out I think the 14th date. Can't wait.
Great. And finally, Gail.
Hi, I'm Gail C. Martin, and together with my co-author and husband, Larry N. Martin, we write 3 series for Falstaff. One of those, the Wasteland Marshall series, we have the 3rd novella in that series coming out hopefully very soon, and that is Ghosts of the Past. And then we will also in short order have the 3rd Spell, Salt, and Steel series, season 2 book, but it doesn't have a title yet, so you'll have to wait on that one.
All right, great. So let's start off with you, Les. Tell me a little bit about your journey to becoming a published author.
Yeah, so The Lost Peterson Apostle is my first one that's being published by any press. I self-published science fiction novella earlier this year, but this all started about a year ago at MarsCon when I was sitting at the bar with John Hartnett, as most of these stories start. And we were talking about how I was having trouble getting things published. He's like, well, why don't you take a shot at writing something in the Bubbaverse and let me take a look at it. He liked what he saw, and that's how the Lost Peterson Apostle's coming around. And I got a 3 novella contract out of it, and all 3 of them are already finished. Second one comes out in July, end of July, and then third one will be out in September, and then the collection hopefully before the end of the year. So it was really fast when it hit, but I've been trying to do this for about 10 years now. He's still looking at my science fiction novel, but it was a long journey, and then when it hits really quick. It's kind of that's what surprised me.
So the 10-year overnight success?
Well, we're working on the success part, but yes, 10-year overnight.
Okay. Now, for the people that aren't aware, explain a little bit about the Bubbaverse.
So yeah, Bubbaverse is your great 300-pound redneck who football somehow is his brother and his father. His family's been in the hunting business for Bubba, and a run-in. I don't want to give out too many spoilers, but this is one of his earlier books. A run-in with werewolves comes to a head, and Bubba ends up working for the Holy Roman Catholic Church as a monster hunter in the southeastern part of the United States. And since he was like, well, it's the Southern Monster Hunter, there's got to be other ones. And so with that concept, he's opened it up to Gail writes in it. I'm one of the newer writers as far as a fresh voice in it. And he's looked at it as a way of bringing new writers and giving them a platform that they can work off of and also bounce off of what he's already done. In my case, my monster hunter is Matthew Peterson, and mine's more of an origin story. The story starts out, he knows nothing about monsters or the things that go bump in the night. And he's headed home because his youngest brother, to bury his youngest brother. And he's had a very rough family life, so he's not relishing going home. He's went to the Army, spent 4 years trying to get away from his family. And so mine's an origin story. He runs across and finds out that the things that go bump in the night had more to do with his brother's death than he ever realized, and his eyes are opened. And from there, the rest of the series is going to follow him as he finally makes that decision whether or not he wants to be a monster hunter.
Okay, great. Now, how about you, Chris?
The question of how I got into writing. Well, I've got about 30 novels in print one way or another, and some in process, et cetera, et cetera. I started out as a self-published author. It was me and my 3 books, each one just one novel, no series yet. Sitting at conventions, talking to people. That's where I met Gail at Dragon Con, very first time. And, you know, just plodding away. Every single connection you make, every single connection I made at a convention kind of ratcheted up my career a little bit. I got a 4-book deal with a small press, Dragon Moon Press, that won 3 consecutive national awards for Best Fantasy Novel of the Year, Indian small press. And from there, I jumped to writing tie-in fiction for a gaming company, Paizo. I wrote some Pathfinder Tales novels that were really well accepted, although the circulation of the series of the imprint did not do spectacularly well. But I had a ball doing it since I've been playing the game forever already and knew the world and stuff like that. I got some other tie-in writers gigs. I am working with an agent now, and I'm working, of course, with I had 2 series out with Ed Greenwood and his publishing company, and then that kind of went south, and he gave us our rights back. And one of those novels was Dragon Dreams, and I rewrote it completely, and it's kind of a doorstop, so a lot of work there. And then got that to John, and he liked it, and so we signed for a trilogy there. And we'll see. You know, that's the one thing about being a writer, is there's always another door opening. If one closes, another one's going to open. And I've got a lot of doors out there. I've got, I think, 3 series in process right now. So
Great.
And that's if the other shoe doesn't drop. If my agent calls me, it'll be 4.
That's what you always hope for, right?
Right. Yeah.
For Dragon Nemesis, that's the new one. You said that's your first contemporary.
Right.
Tell us a little bit about the story.
Well, my wife and I are both scientists by our previous. Prior to being writers, we were both professional scientists. My wife's a PhD biologist, and I worked in medical research forever. And so I wanted to write a novel that was kind of urban fantasy, but heavy on the science, and we set it in Boston, which is my wife's hometown. And we tramped across Boston with a camera, taking thousands of pictures to get every little detail properly right. And had a great time doing it. And had written it up initially to pitch to an agent, and then Ed came up and he liked the story, so I revamped it and wrote it into his universe, and then I had to rewrite it again to make it my own again. But yeah, getting everything right in the Boston area and making it a very sciencey novel. The premise is if you've ever seen or read the book, seen the movie or read the book Relic, where a researcher finds something that actually transforms a human into something else. That's very much like this. I got into paleontology, and my primary character suffers from social anxiety disorder, really bad. And I did a ton of research to get that right, and I've gotten some kudos as far as getting that right, the mannerisms and the constant fear and clenching and paralyzing anxiety, and how an academic career can really put the vice on someone who has social anxiety disorder. And she's a brilliant young scientist, and being abused by one advisor, switches advisors and gets this whole new project. And this project, one of the samples turns out to be infectious, and it's not anything anybody's ever seen before. And then she starts changing. And I'm not going to ruin the story.
All right, great. Thank you.
Sure.
Gail.
Okay, so Wasteland Marshals, well, how did I get published? I kind of went a different route from, I think, everybody here, in that when I started back my first publication was in 2007, I went the traditional route. So pitch the agent pitches the publisher, you go through the big London or New York City publishing house, and that worked pretty well for quite a few years and several series. And then the market continued to change, and kind of started looking at things going, you know, there are some benefits to working with big publishers, but many of the benefits that they always sold themselves on, we can get you into bookstores, we can get you into the science fiction book club, we can get you into all these other things. Well, not really, because the bookstores went away. Nobody joins book clubs anymore, book of the month clubs. And good luck, even if you are theoretically in bookstores. If there's a bookstore, they're under no obligation to have your entire series. So, you know, with my luck, I walk in and they've got books 3 and 7.
Right.
Means people are going to have to go out on Amazon and buy them anyhow, and so they're going to buy the whole thing on Amazon. The benefits just became much less worth the 85% of the cover price that they kept taking. And they weren't doing that much marketing either. So I kind of looked at it at a certain point, and also had a lot of turnover with editors. I tell the story that when I was with one publisher, big New York, London house, I was with them for 6 years. For those 6 years, I had 3 editors, and for 2.5 years, I didn't have an editor because that was the cumulative amount of time they were hiring a new editor. And you can't do a series like that. There was no institutional memory. They were hiring people who didn't know the genre, who didn't know the industry, who were exuberant and bright-eyed and bushy-tailed, and they knew where the commas were supposed to go. But in terms of mentoring or providing insight into this is how we make a book a bestseller, the ink wasn't dry on their degree yet. And you're kind of looking at this going, and you're taking how much of my cover price for this? And so we said, you know what? I think we're just gonna pass on this. And so most of our books now are coming out indie. We did pitch 3 series to John because I like working with John and because it was a good fit. One of them is the Spell, Salt, and Steel series, which is our Bubbaverse series. And that's Mark Wojcik, who is a snarky monster hunter in the wilds of northwestern Pennsylvania, which is where Larry and I are both from. So we're really writing our stomping ground and all of the urban legends and the ghost stories and all of the other things that go with that. So that is a blast, and it ties right into Bubba. And he's got that section of the northwest Pennsylvania. Then Wasteland Marshals is our near future post-apocalyptic series. And when we pitched this to John, we said, Boondock Saints meets The Walking Dead. And he said, sounds good to me. And so that is the one that has Ghosts of the Past coming out later this month. And then the 3rd series is the Joe Mack Chronicles, the Joe Mack Adventures. They're in the Quincy Harker universe, which is another one of John's series. And Joe Mack is a steel worker who was killed in the Homestead riots, who swore vengeance and sold his soul for vengeance to Krukus, the Slavic god of blacksmiths. And now he is the instrument of Krukus's justice for those who are oppressed. And set in 1928, and so you've got a lot of the Roaring 20s things going on, and so that is a fun series as well.
Fun.
And so back to the publishing piece, now we have quite a bit of our backlist still with major publishers. All of our new stuff is coming out in ebook and print, either with John or independently, and then our audio comes out through either Tantor or recorded books. So we have this odd little straddle going with indie and publishing, but it works. And as long as everybody's happy with it, that's pretty cool. The book that is coming out in June, Wasteland Marshals 3, Ghosts of the Past, You've got the last two U.S. Marshals in the Pennsylvania, Ohio, West Virginia territory. The civilization pretty much collapsed in this massive cataclysm that started when terrorists turned their own nuclear weapons against the countries and bombed out their capitals, and then the grid went down, and then everything else kind of went domino effect from there. So it's been 4 years since the events, as people just refer to them, and Lucas and Shane are the last semblance of major law enforcement. They're on horseback riding a circuit. They are, as Lucas likes to put it, no longer human and not quietly sane because of some of the things that happened in the first couple of books. And they're doing their best to hold the line. The military at this point has been stretched thin and is gone. Major law enforcement is largely gone. If they didn't die in the events, they've bought it since then with how rough it's been. So now we're kind of down to local law enforcement, some sheriffs, some park rangers, and the last two U.S. Marshals. And in Ghosts of the Past, they get a distress call to come to West Virginia to deal with a hotel that is there and not there.
Okay. Now, finally, Patrick, a little bit about how you got into publishing and your newest book.
So I got into publishing the opposite of Gail. I actually started taking classes with John Hartness on how to self-pub, because I was like, well, I've been working on Stormforged for, I don't know, 6 years at that point. And it was done, and it, I thought it was really tightly edited, which wasn't even close. But it was my first book. So I had actually gone to John because we'd gotten to be, I kept going to his classes. So he's finally, I said, can you just read this and see if this is any good, or should I just throw it out and, just go play video games instead? And so he read it, and we met for dinner, and he said, I really like you, so I'm really glad I like your book. He's like, this is really good. So I was like, oh, excellent, because John doesn't like a lot. So if he likes your book, you're doing pretty good. And so I worked with him, and I queried for over 2 years on Stormforged, and nothing. I could not get an agent to save my life. So I told John, like, I'm done. I'm just quitting. And he's like, I love the book. Give it to me. He's like, so we ended up signing a 3-book deal, which Storm Shatter is the last of them. Stormforge actually won the 2019 Imagine Award for Best Indie Sci-Fi Novel for last year. So that was really nice. And then, like I said earlier, Sean McGuire, I gave her a copy at Con Carolinas, and she actually read it the other day and tweeted about it, which I just about felt to share. So then I decided to, I do have Fate and Flux, which is a steampunk adventure. I just wanted to try self-pub since I had taken all those classes. So I kind of dove into that, and I have a cyberpunk heist novel set in the world of the hidden people that have left Earth. And I actually got an agent. I actually pitched him a different book. And he said, I like your writing, I just don't like this book a lot. He's like, you got anything else? I'm like, oh, well, I've got this one. And he literally called me. He said, I literally just set down the book. He's like, I've got to represent it. It's so good. He's like, it'll sell. I'm like, oh, okay.
That's good.
But the thing is, in everybody, it's like you get, you pitch to all these agents and nobody sees anything in it. They don't want it. And then all of a sudden one person actually believes in it, and then it's like lightning, and you're just like, oh, okay. So I'm finishing up the edits that he requested, and so I'll be turning that over. So I went small press, indie, traditional. So, so we'll see how it goes. Just because you have an agent doesn't mean you're selling a book. So
that's dead on accurate.
I mean, and the thing is, after 5 years of querying, it was just nice to get the validation of, hey, I've got an agent now. And I get, every time my wife asks me to do something, I can say, I don't know, you have to talk to my agent about that, which is, I think she's tired of, but I'm not. So, So Storm Shattered picks up at the end of Unbreakable Storm. Tommy and his family and friends have gotten away from the Protectorate, which is after a giant terrorist attack before Tommy was even born, decimates the Earth. The terrorists were using a death ray from orbiting space station. And so everybody talks about, it's called the Darkest Storm, was the event. And so they ended up getting away, and then they finally think they're safe, and then the death ray starts firing again, and nobody knows why. And so the Protectorate goes on and tells everybody that he's doing it on purpose, which is a lie, kind of like current events. So this book tracks through, it's kind of a ticking clock book, because they have to figure out how to stop the death ray from killing everybody before it leaves its predetermined pattern, and they don't know what happens after that. So that's pretty much Storm Shattered.
Okay.
If I can jump in with an agent story.
Of course.
So I had been working on the book that eventually became The Summoner. I started the book when I was the same age as the main character in the book, who was 19. I saw the book come into print when I was 45. There was a bit of a lag there. Never give up.
Yeah.
And it would get revised, go in a drawer, get revised, go in a drawer. Life kept coming up. And that went on through college, grad school, started a new job, got married, had kids, moved, started another job. I mean, there was this pattern. And I finally got laid off and said, you know what, if I'm going to ever do this, I'm going to do it now. And I'm going to take the time it takes to pitch agents, and then we'll see what I can do. But if I don't make this a priority right now, it's not going to get done. So I started pitching agents, did all the research, pitched, and I have a sheaf of rejection letters to show for it. In fact, there was this one agent that I got a form postcard from. Not even a letter, didn't bother with an envelope, it was a form postcard. Well, I had a close shave with an agent from a big agency, and they came back and said, I'm not guaranteeing that I'd rep this, but I kind of like it. I think it would be stronger if you made these changes. And I looked at it and said, well, whether she takes it on or not, I agree that I think it would be stronger. So whether it hits with her or someone else, I think this would honestly be an improvement. I'm not just doing it to please her. Well, I made the changes. She didn't pick it up. And I was crying on somebody's shoulder who knew something about publishing. And they said, look, if I know that agent, and if you got that far with her, what you've got is publishable. You just have to find somebody to fall in love with it. And so I had this revised, first chapter book that I had done for her. And then I revised my query letter. And that agent, and I forgot that I had gotten turned down by the agent who sent me the form postcard. So I sent it out again. It had been, probably a year. So I sent him the revised query letter and the revised manuscript. And this time I got a deal. 3 things changed. I revised the manuscript, and it was better. I revised the query letter, which counted for a hell of a lot. And he now had a publisher looking for a book that was exactly what I turned in. So he had a place to sell it. Which I guess my moral of the story is, don't take rejection to be a final no. Realize it might be the wrapper and not the book. So spiff off your cover letter and try it again. And realize that an agent probably won't take you on if they don't have a good idea where they can sell the book, because they aren't going to make any money until you do. So it may not even be that they don't like the book, they just don't see a place in the market to sell it. It's not a reflection on the quality of the book. It just is a reality of the world of traditional publishing.
Well, I had stuttered the cyberpunk book and had started pitching a completely different book. when he asked for something else, and that one he loved, and everybody else I had sent to was like, I don't know where to sell this.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Right. You know, it's 30% hard work, 30% perseverance, not ever going away, and 30% luck. Just hitting the right thing at the right time. The way I got the Paizo deal is I was at Gen Con and I screwed up my courage and I walked up to the acquisitions editor for Paizo and I said, look, you're doing Pathfinder Tales. Your map has all this water and you don't have any pirate stories. I'm your guy, because I just come off of a 4-book series of pirate stories. And hey, that's, you know, I'm a sailor. And I said, you need me to write pirate stories for you. And he said, well, send me a sample. So I did. And 6 months later, that's the luck part. 6 months later, he says, write some short stuff for us. And I did, for the web fiction. And then out of the blue, one of his authors drops out of the publishing sequence. And the next email after I submitted the short fiction, the next email I got from James Sutter was the subject line was Paizo novel. And I was like, holy shit. Excuse me. Oh, PG-13. But I levitated off the ground, because I mean, that was just like lightning striking. And he said, look, I'm crunched for time. If you can get me a finished, clean manuscript, and he already knew I wrote pretty clean, in 5 months, it's yours. And I said, not a problem. And fortunately, we had just quit our day jobs and we were out sailing around. And yeah, it's nice to not have a day job when you have a deadline. And I wrote the first draft in 30 days. So I was possessed. Of course, then it was so dirty that I took 3 months to edit it, but my wife and I. But and that was the first of 3 books that I wrote for them. I actually wrote 5, but 2 were orphaned. But I got paid for them, so hey. But the way the industry has changed in the last, what, Gail, 15 years, it's just it's not even the same business.
No, it's not. It's not in the last 5 years, and unfortunately, there's some major publishers who don't realize that.
Yeah, they didn't realize it in 2007, I sat at a writers' conference with some of the biggest editors in the genre, New York editors, and they were saying that ebooks just weren't a thing. 7% of market share, they weren't even putting any effort into it. And when I asked, and I'm not going to drop any names, but when I asked a tech specialist author, what about the Kindle? It's starting to get popular. And he says, the Kindle will never work because it only does one thing. You know, you can do 15 things on your phone. Why would you have a Kindle? And now look, everybody's got a Kindle, and they've got Kindle on their phone. So, you know, the lack of foresight, and I'm not dissing the industry, well, I kind of am, is just astounding. It's like you can't see the writing on the wall.
I always describe publishing as a great 19th century business model.
Right.
And
yeah.
it hasn't changed, and they can't figure out why it isn't working anymore.
Right. When print on demand first came out and you could order one book and get that book, that changed the industry, because no returns, no warehousing, no air-conditioned warehouses, and they didn't realize it, and they're still trying to push the big, you know, industry. We're going to do a 10,000 book run. Okay, and then you're gonna spend thousands and thousands of dollars storing those books.
Mm-hmm.
And now they can't even go to this book. Sorry. Now you can't even go to the bookstore to buy them.
Right.
And then they can return them at will whenever they want and get all of their money back.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. So one of the editors said their model was, if they print 10 books, they will actually sell 1.5 of those books. And I was like, what? How can that be a money-making proposition when 8.5 of those books are going to get pulped?
Mm-hmm. So that's, totally not the panel we're here to discuss, but.
Look, squirrel.
But it's useful information.
We'll talk.
Yeah.
Well, it also reflects on for new writers that are looking to get into the industry, because I started going to cons back around 2010,
Right.
and the direction you were getting, one, suggest people go to cons when they open back up, and definitely see these online ones, because you got to be around people in the industry.
Oh, yeah.
One, it gives you connections, and two, just seeing how other people do it. Every success story is another path that lays the road for you that you can find for your own success. My path isn't the same as anyone else on this panel,
Right.
but everyone else on this panel has influenced my path to publication. So
Every single advance I have had in my career, every single one has been through a connection I made at a convention. Talking to people, getting recommendations, walking up to editors, buying them drinks, getting them drunk, which is fun too, you know, right?
Well, and not just conventions, but, and I realize that book signings in bookstores is kind of a dying thing, but take the chance if there's an author that you admire and show up at the book signing. It could be very well that it is a miserable day outside, it's pouring down rain, and there's nobody in the bookstore. Pardon me. That happened to me on both sides of the coin. Back in about, I guess it was about 97 or 98, I was really getting serious about this publishing thing. And so I knew they were going to have a very well-regarded sci-fi author come to the bookstore that was close to our house. And I hadn't read any of his stuff, but I knew he'd been around for a while and he had a lot of books out, and he had books out with different imprints. And so I resolved that I was going to go, and even if I just got to talk to him while he was signing a book, I was going to pick his brain as much as I could. Well, it turned out it was a pouring downpour monsoon that day. And the bookstore was a standalone. Nobody came out. So I had David Drake to myself for 2 whole hours.
Right.
And he and his wife were very, very gracious, and they answered all of my questions. I think he got a real kick out of it because I had notes. And I was taking notes. He thought it was a blast. Right. What else was he going to do? There was nobody in the store to sell books to.
Yep.
So he very graciously answered all my questions, and then he said, look, if you have any more, he gave me his email address, and on and off through the next several years, if I had a question, I emailed him. When I was looking to get the agent, I asked, hey, have you heard about this guy? Is he okay? And Dave was always there as a sounding board and a mentor, and he gave me my cover blurb when The Summoner came out, which was a wonderful, wonderful thing. And it all started because I showed up at a book signing on a rainy day with a bunch of questions. But I've also had one of my good friends now, who is now published but wasn't at the time, showed up at a book signing I did that happened to be on a crappy rainy day with nobody in the book sign, and sat there and talked to me for 2 hours, and we had a great time. And now he's published, we're really good friends, and pass it on. So any chance you have to pick someone's brain, most of the authors you're going to meet, not all, but most, are pretty decent people if you ask questions at a good time.
Right.
I had a very similar story because I had never heard of science fiction conventions because I grew up in the boondocks of New York. But I was working in Roanoke, Virginia, and just happened to swing by the bookstore because I like hanging out in the bookstore for obvious reasons. And R.S. Belcher was there doing a book signing, and it was his very first book out. It was his Six Gun Tarot, and he was there, and I'm like, oh, cool, there's a book. He's like, yeah, well, I'm also going to be at this convention at the end of the week, and it was Mysticon. And so I met Rod. I got to talk to him, find out what his story was, and then I got to go to a convention and meet an author whose books I've read, which I really enjoyed, as the guest of honor, and that was a really cool experience. And that's really what kicked off my whole thing. I mean, I had 30,000 words in my first novel written by that point in time. So it was serendipity or whatever you want to call it. But I mean, that's what got you going. It got me going anyways.
Oh yeah. The level of enthusiasm you get for just, the first major author I sat down with and talked to was Elizabeth Moon. That was back in the 80s at a small writers conference. And then I had the amazing experience of sitting down with Oh, and now I just dropped the name. Another, Joe Haldeman, sorry. Joe Haldeman at who I've idolized forever at a convention. And then Stephen Brust, who I've idolized. We sat and drank ourselves stupid at a convention. And those experiences will always last in my memory, the ones that I can still recall because through the alcohol haze. They're just so inspiring. And when you get blocked, when you get down, when you get, even when you know, not going to convention, but you dredge those memories up and you think, you know, yeah, that's why I'm a writer.
Yeah, I met Robert Jordan. He was at the local bookstore, and it didn't do any advertising. I just happened to, one of my friends called and said, "Hey, you know this guy? He's at the bookstore tomorrow." And I was like, "Oh my God, it's Robert Jordan? Yeah, I'm going." So I took my books and I went, and he said, he was a huge guy. I mean, he was like 6'6", big guy. And he said, "Okay." He's like, "I do personalized books. So one per, you can get 2 books signed." So I was like, okay. So I went through the line and I just kind of hung out. I was listening to him talk, to the other people who were there. Well, everybody got their books signed, left. And he's like, there were like 6 of us. He goes, "Well, if you're in line and I've already signed your book, I'll personalize it." So I got my books personalized. And then he just said, "I've got another hour and a half." And he sat down next to his wife, and there were like 4 of us. And we sat on the floor like we were in kindergarten in front of him. And he like just, "What do you want to know? How do you?" So I was like belting out writing questions like crazy, and he answered every one of them.
Wow.
So
Yeah.
it was incredible. And that really helped kickstart, like, oh, I really could do this, because he was like, "Yeah, I started off writing Conan the Barbarian books." He's like, for fan fiction, and they just got picked up. I was like, "Oh, excellent." So,
And this is something I've heard from everyone I've interviewed for this show, the Hot Off the Press show. And in my own experience, I'm, as John calls it, an as yet unpublished author. And I spent years just spinning my wheels because I wasn't making those contacts like that. I played pool in the French Quarter with Robert Aspirin for a couple years, but I kind of avoided it. It wasn't until I sat down with John and other people at conventions that I started seeing that, yes, I can do this. It's not that mystical thing off in the distance. And, I hate to pull this back in at this point, but let's get back a little bit to, and this doesn't change it too much, but your writing process. We've talked a little bit about how, you've gotten published. What do you do typically to write? And we'll start with you, Chris.
My writing process changed drastically when I went from a 9-hour-a-day work day job with 45 minutes to an hour commute on each end, and writing at night and getting about 5 hours of sleep at a time. I did that for 10, 15 years, and it was destroying me. To when I quit my day job and we went sailing, I then started writing in the morning, and I find my productivity just skyrocketed. If I can treat my writing, and if you ask 100 authors how they write, you'll get 100 different answers, and none of them will be wrong if it's working. But I personally have to not do anything that will distract me. So I get up in the morning, I pour a cup of coffee, I sit down in front of my computer and turn off my internet connection, and I write solid, or edit solid, or outline solid, or do whatever I'm doing solid. Usually, break for breakfast, get another cup of coffee, whatever, stretch, do some exercises, until about noonish, depending on what I have going on that day. And then I get out and I do something physical. Yard work, swimming, if we're on the boat, we're snorkeling, whatever. And then in the afternoon or evening, if I'm not doing anything else, watching a movie or reading, I'll sit down and read what I wrote that morning, and, refamiliarize myself. Does it suck? How bad does it suck? The answer to those is yes and bad, usually. But then the next morning, I get up and I take what I wrote the previous day and I read it. That's the first thing I always do. Read what I wrote the previous day. And that I don't cringe too much. I don't try to edit. I might make some notes, but that just gets me back in on the hamster wheel. My wheels are rolling, and I just take off again. So,
yeah. Did you find you liked it better when you had to force it into chunks when you had your day job, or
no,
is it better now?
I didn't. I much better now, because I do it when I don't have my brain full of other things. And generally, my brain was so, I loved my work, but I hated the people I worked for. It was a very high stress job. So when I got home, even after 45 minutes on the road listening to an audiobook, I wasn't fully decompressed, and it was hard to get into the writing thing. So it took years to write a book, whereas now I can usually churn out a first draft in about a month, a little bit more, 6 weeks, depending on how well I outlined it and things like that. So it generally takes me a couple of weeks to outline a book, a month to 6 weeks to write it, and then a few months to edit it. But as I'm editing that book, I'm already moving on to the next one, outlining the next one. So,
okay, great. How about you, Les?
I'm still in that 9 to 5 or 8 to 5 day job thing. So I get an hour for lunch. Things have changed with the whole COVID, but before that, when I was writing the Lost Peterson Apostle, squeezed in there was a Subway, and it was the only place that had a decent dining area in downtown Richmond, about where I work. Not that I love Subway, but I had Subway for about 7 weeks straight. And that was just because it wasn't in my office where people could bug me, and I could squeeze in about 45 minutes of writing. And on a good day, that'd be 1,000 words. On some other days, only be a couple hundred words. Get home at night, have dinner with the family, and it wasn't extremely productive, but to kind of parse together both family time and writing, I would sit and my wife would watch, HGTV or whatever, where it doesn't take a lot of my attention, and I would be tweaking things, especially during commercials. Stop skipping the commercial. I need to write, and squeeze in what I could. Some stories have taken a lot of time, just because, especially the science fiction ones, a little more technical detail. The Monster Hunter one surprised me. I never thought I could write urban fantasy, and I got into it. John's like, well, write this for me. I'm so hungry for something to sell that I was like, okay, I'll give him that shot. And that story just flowed. I had a 40,000 word novella done in about 4.5, 5 weeks, even working a 9 to 5 day job.
Wow, that's good.
Yeah, I was impressed at how fast that came out. And then I spent several months editing it. I'm really fortunate. I'm an engineer. My spelling sucks. My grammar's really bad. But I've married a communications person, so she takes care of that for me before I give it to John. And so, I generally get the concept of the story pretty well, and she helps me with the grammar. And then when it hits the editing staff, they hit it pretty hard too. But I find when it gets into the editing phase, I've done it a couple ways. I take a Word document or I print it off, and I will edit a chapter during my lunch break. And then in the evening, I would go and put the edits into the actual manuscript. And then I actually had 2 Word documents. I had the raw version, and then I had the one I'm editing. And I would work on the raw one. And then once I got that chapter done, I would delete it off the raw one, so the next chapter was the next thing I'd hit. So I wasn't scrolling through pages to get to the next section to edit. So
that's proof positive that everybody has a different thing, because that would scare the living crap out of me.
I've got multiple copies. I've got it on the cloud.
Right, exactly. Yeah, multiple backups.
So the only thing that scares me is when I forget. I'm like, wait, this one's sync, because I'm using the cloud service now. So I've got my computer, my desktop at home, and my laptop, and I'm using the cloud to sync. And I'll jump on one. I'm like, oh, it didn't sync first. So then I got to kind of pull up both the cloud version and the one I'm working on. I'm like, okay, where's the differences? And that's where I need to kind of splice it back together. But,
so have you found that you prefer working in someone else's universe, the rules in there, or do you like your own?
I prefer my own, and I took advantage of several things with John's universe. One is it's urban fantasy and monsters, which are pretty well understood. I stuck with something that was unique. I'm like, which monsters haven't been touched? Okay, I'm going to use one of those, so I didn't have to worry about bringing in what someone else had already put in as canon. And it's working in a known universe, in his universe, so I got to match up anything that's true in his universe. And then it's also urban, which means I have to kind of stay true to what the world is around me. So where my science fiction, I invent everything. My world can be whatever I want it to be because it doesn't exist other than in my mind. So it gives me a little bit more freedom. Of course, then you got to remember when you get into the later chapters, is that true in my world?
All right. How about you, Patrick? You're writing.
I work 9 to 5, 8 to 5, whatever it is. So I usually get home. Now I'm always home because COVID. But from 7 to 9 is usually my time that the family knows that I am writing. And if I get on a roll, I'll go longer. I wrote Storm Shattered. I wrote the first draft in 2 months. The book that I was shopping previously, I wrote in 3 weeks. It was 85,000 words. My wife went on a business trip, so I just hammered it out. I don't plan anything. I sit down with a story pretty much in my head to start with, and it just rolls usually. Really, the novellas and short stories are much harder for me to write than novels are. The long form just suits me much better. And so, because I actually thought I had 4 months to write Storm Shattered, and I ran into John and he said, I need that book at the end of July, right? And I'm like, and it was the first week of June. And I was like, oh, yeah, I should probably get on that. I've written a whole chapter so far. So he gave me an extra week and I hit the deadline. So, but yeah, I am total pants. I usually have a good idea in my head of what's going to happen. And it twists, but like the end of Storm Shattered, I was actually sitting there typing it going, this isn't what's supposed to happen. And it was just coming out and I was like, all right, we're going with it. And so, and it was a much better ending than what I had planned. So I don't outline anything. I spend the time to outline it. By the end of chapter 1, I'm off the outline already. So it just doesn't make sense.
So is this the end of this complete series, or are you going to have a book 4?
This is the first trilogy, so I think this is probably most likely where it's going to end. I don't know that the genre isn't as popular as it used to be. So, and now I've got my cyberpunk book that I'm spending more time on, and I wrote a urban fantasy about witches in Asheville that protect humanity from stuff that comes through the portals of the Nexus that I've got to clean up again and make changes and hopefully shop that one, after the cyberpunk book. So, and then I'm writing a straight up fantasy novel. So.
Okay, great. And how about you, Gail?
Well, it took 20 years to write the first book, but I've gotten faster since that. The first 4 books, well, when I was on traditional publishing, those books were a book a year. And for the first 4 books, it was just me finally, out of corporate, and I was running my own marketing consulting firm, but I was able to adjust my schedule. So first 4 books, it was just me really working on them. And then my husband left corporate, and so Larry came into the business with me, which is something we'd always talked about wanting to do. Timing wasn't ideal, but it never is. And we said, well, let's just make it work. And so we have. That was 10 years ago. And so now I'm not a morning person. So mornings for me are getting all the slightly brainless stuff done, like email and administrative stuff. And then after lunch, really diving into getting the writing done. Right now, we're bringing out about a book a month. I think I have 12 series going. One of those is going to wrap up. But between the Gail Z. Martin books and the Morgan Bryce books, all of our urban fantasy series cross over and all the characters know each other and show up in each other's books. Pardon me. So it's a large expanded universe. And that's fun and a little crazy making. Larry and I tag team on these things. So I'll get, I usually do kind of the outline in the first draft. Got to outline because otherwise I go down too many dead ends and I don't have time to rewrite that amount of stuff. So the better I outline, the more complete my outline is within reason, the less time I have to sit there and stare at the screen wondering where I'm going because I already know. And that means the whole process moves faster. So I usually do the first draft, I toss it over to Larry. He comes through, he looks for all the logic errors and the places you could, drive a truck through the plot. And, oh, by the way, chapter 2 is a snooze. And, he writes in his changes and improvements. And we've gotten to the point now where we can't tell where the other person wrote things in. So the voice is very, very similar. And while he's doing that, I'm working on something else. And then, we swap out. So we can keep multiple projects in multiple stages of development because we're passing it back and forth between each other. Unfortunately, he cares where the commas go. And he is he's fantastic first editor. And he is terrific at brainstorming up front to get the plot together. And when I get stuck on something, we'll go walk the dogs and I'll go, okay, so here's what I'm stuck on. And usually by the time we've gotten the dogs around the block, we've figured it out. So that's to me, the power of partnership is that we can get this stuff done. And then he's terrific doing things like tracking royalties and some of that back end stuff that just makes my hair curl. And I deal with the marketing stuff because that was my day job for a long time. So we just kind of pass the pieces back and forth. But I'll often write, until 9:30 at night, but I won't start the actual writing stuff until about 2 in the afternoon. And that's just, the brain does not work nearly as well in the morning for creative stuff as it does later at night. I've always been a night owl. So yeah, Chris was right. Ask 100 authors, you'll get 102 opinions.
Right.
All right, great. And now, what was something in this series, doesn't have to be this book, that surprised you the most through the writing? I'll start with you, Les.
I gotta unmute myself. Thing that surprised me the most, it really was jumping in an urban fantasy. I thought there was no way I would write anything in a contemporary world. I think there's too much locked into place with not enough freedom, is what I always thought. And then I got into the story and it just flowed. That's it. The first draft just flowed right out, and I was really surprised at that, especially when you threw in some elements from my own life. The main character grows up on a farm. He's been in the military. I have a little bit of military experience, and he comes from a fairly large family. There's 5 kids in this family, and so I threw in some stuff I knew to help me get along. But the way the story came out, and then his dad is so much different than mine, which is, it kind of worries me when my family reads it. I'm like, no, it's not about that. You guys know it's not about that, because he's really a jerk in this book. But the way it came out, usually if I get stuck on a plot point, it's finding those little times. I'm surprised at how much I can write during a really quick lunch hour. I don't have time I don't plot necessarily, like write down a plot, but when I take that half-hour drive to work every morning, I have a voice recorder, and I'll talk myself through the next plot point. So I kind of know where it's going, at least 1 or 2 steps ahead, and I found that to be very helpful, and kind of surprised at how effective that is. Even though I hardly ever re-listen to them, it's just walking it through, getting it straight in my head. That way, when I sit down at lunch, I just write, and it comes right out, and that's been a lot of fun. The support from my family was a little surprising. So I'm an engineer. I hated English when I was growing up. There's a couple teachers I didn't really care for, but I really wasn't a strong English student, but here I am telling stories, and they all seem to enjoy them. So that was surprising both to me and to my family. So.
Okay, great. And Patrick, you said the ending surprised you. Is there anything else?
The ending was the biggest shock. Where the series ends up, the twist, there's a couple good twists at the end of Storm Shatter that I wasn't really anticipating. It wasn't until I got there and was like, oh, that'd be cool. And so some of that stuff, it's always, for me, it's fun because I don't plan. So, my brain's just percolating as I'm writing. So then I do come up with like stuff that I would have never thought of sitting and just writing down an outline. So really the fact that I finish books sometimes surprises me. So.
All right, great. Gail.
With the Wasteland Marshall series, I think I'd never done a contemporary post-apocalyptic. Technically, the Ascending Kingdom saga is medieval post-apocalyptic, but it's not our kind of apocalypse. In their case, it was a war of magical destruction that was a little too successful and knocked out the ability to control magic, and things went downhill from there. With Wasteland Marshalls, it's a very contemporary, very real-world kind of cataclysm, and then all of the domino effect things that happen, like the tsunamis and all the other things that happen when you set off a bunch of nuclear bombs. And I think that imagining that near future landscape and wreckage in, again, our home territory area is a very sobering thing, but none of our series are ever without hope. Our series always, the good guys always win. I mean, that's not really a spoiler. They are beat up and damaged and scarred and traumatized, but good always wins. And that's kind of my crackerjack prize for readers, is that I'm not going to leave you with a nihilistic ending. Good guys win somehow. And having Lucas and Shane find that hope, no matter what they're going up against, and obviously as the series goes on, the odds get bigger and the bad guys get badder. But between their friendship and their abilities and the allies that they find, there's always hope. And I think that's kind of the surprising thing, is when you find that, and that kind of makes it all worthwhile.
Okay, great. And now, in any of these stories, I know you said you're a big outliner. Have you ever worked yourself into a corner where you had to revise to be able to get that hope?
Not so much to get the hope. I have mastered the technique of writing outlines that sound really good, and then you go to actually write from some of the outline. I've sold series on outlines that sounded great, and then I sat down to write from that outline and went, what the hell, there is no meat in this chapter, it just sounded good. So then you have to kind of go back and fill in stuff that was supposed to be there. So I think that's the biggest thing, is sometimes you think you have the outline, and then when you go to write it, there really isn't enough in that chapter you set aside to carry the action, so you have to now figure something else out. And sometimes then, of course, as you're writing it, the book doesn't take off in a completely different direction, but it may decide to take a detour to where it needs to end up. And you may end up going, the bridge is out, so you take another road. You still get where you intended to go, but this new opportunity came up, and so you go that way, and that makes it a lot more fun.
Okay, great. And how about you, Chris?
Just kind of one of the things that that Gail said really hit home. I meticulously outline, but I don't think once have I meticulously stuck to my outline. And a lot of people, outlines paralyze them because they think that this is my framework and I must conform to it. No, it's just a guideline. But in the Dragon Dream series, one of the things that, so I despise conspiracy theories and all of the urban legend stuff. It makes my teeth hurt how much I got into conspiracy theories and urban legends. Okay, let's make this an urban fantasy. Let's make it urban science fiction fantasy, and how much I really enjoyed myself doing it. And because the science is real. I mean, my wife and I got into genetics and how would they code this thing, and at what temperature would a pyroclastic ash flow destroy DNA, and da 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 da. Oh yeah, we're real scientists. And but then you have to bring it back, and then you have to get into all the sideways stuff. And yeah, the outline had to be revised multiple times because, oh, wouldn't it be cool if this? And then we have to go back through and again. But yeah, how much I got into the whole conspiracy theories, urban legends, and what if this was real? Ooh, and what if that happened? You know, so yeah. And, you know, subversive government plots to do this and that and the other thing. So I surprised myself.
I had an editor once who said, you went off the outline in this chapter. Why did you do that? And I looked at him and said, because the book would have sucked if I hadn't.
And, you know, and that's just it. When I was doing tie-in, when I'm still doing tie-in fiction, when I'm doing tie-in fiction, you have to sell the actual outline of the story before you sign a contract. So they expect you to kind of stick to it, but still, you know, I always ask permission. I was like, okay, James, I'm going off track here, and this is why, you know, in just an email. And invariably the answer is, okay, go, you know, because, and that's the trust thing that you build with a good editor, is he knows that, or they know, the editor knows that you're a lot closer to the story than they are at that point, and you can see when something needs to be altered, and that's when, you know, you and an editor are working well together. I have had great editors. I've had horrific experiences with editors, but I've always learned something from every single one of them. So
yeah, that's a whole nother panel.
yeah, it is. But
that one starts at 10.
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to be asleep by then. Sorry.
Well, I do want to thank all of you for coming out. This has been very informative, not only just about your books, but about the whole process and everything. So as a wrap up, let's go around, let everyone know where they can find you on social media. We'll start with you, Patrick.
I am at patrickdugan.net. I am on Facebook. It's Patrick Dugan Author, as I am on Instagram. I'm at P_Dugan on Twitter. And definitely go out and sign up for my newsletter on my website. It's a lot of fun. So we have a really good, I have a really good reader base that has generated a lot of fun stuff off the newsletters. Great.
Gail?
I'm at gailzmartin.com and morganbryce.com. The Z is important. Otherwise, you'll find somebody else who's an excellent writer, but not me. And Twitter is Gail, at Gail Z. Martin. Everything is pretty much either Gail Z. Martin or GZ Martin. I'm pretty easy to find.
All right, and Chris?
Yeah, because Chris Jackson is such a common name, my website is jaxbooks, jaxbooks.com. And you can read samples of all of my books I have in print from that website. You can find out where they're on sale. If you want to catch me on Twitter, it's Chris A. Jackson #1. If you're on Facebook, just do a search for Chris A. Jackson. The A is important, like Gail said. Otherwise, you're going to get a football guy or a wrestler or a porn star. And no, that's not me. But
you.
Okay. But and that's just about all I do for social media, because I find it to be a draining experience, and it, you know, it takes so much time. It's necessary, but if I wasn't writing, I wouldn't be on social media. You can also find me on Goodreads, and I have a lot of good reviews on Goodreads too. So, but I'm out there.
All right,
and we have a newsletter sign up, of course, on the website. So look for it.
All right, and finally, Les.
Yeah, I'm on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram, all as Les Gould Writes. So that's pretty easy. My website is lesgould.com. I would tell you to search for my name, but please use Les Gould, because Leslie Gould is a very prolific Amish romance writer. That's not me. I can't do the Amish romance. But you can find my stuff at lesgould.com. They're available on Amazon, obviously, and I'm on Goodreads. And if you happen to have read some of my stuff, please leave a review. I'm still new. I still read them because I like it. I haven't got any really bad ones yet, so I'm fortunate.
You're so lucky.
I've been told they'll be there eventually. But
All right. Thank you so much again. And thank you for watching. This has been Hot Off the Press. Have a good night.
Thanks, Jason. Good night, everyone.
Thanks,
Night.
Jason.